The projector flickered before catching a steady rhythm, washing the conference room in a pale blue glow. The light spilled across polished glass walls and the long table that could easily seat 20 people. Reflections of faces shimmered in the surface like ghosts of ambition. The city outside Boston's financial district glimmered beneath a thin veil of winter haze. Inside, the air was perfectly still, the kind of stillness that comes before a controlled detonation. On the screen, large white letters appeared: Silver Line District, a vision by Ethan Andrews. A ripple of applause filled the room. Someone laughed softly in admiration, another tapped the table twice as if sealing a deal with invisible partners. My brother stood near the screen, hands folded, posture relaxed, soaking in the warmth of praise that did not belong to him. I kept my face neutral. My pulse was a metronome gone mad. The words on that screen had once existed only inside my head and in the countless drafts saved on my hard drive. I remembered the nights when those blueprints had covered the floor of my apartment, paper curling at the edges from spilled coffee. I had stayed awake through snowstorms refining every structural ratio. It was supposed to be my vision for the company's next generation of eco-districts. And yet here I was, sitting under cold fluorescent light, watching Ethan claim authorship with the effortless confidence of someone who had never spent a single night worrying about concrete cure ratios or zoning codes. Father sat at the head of the table. Henry Andrews, founder of Andrews Structure Group, the man who taught me that steel bends only for those who understand its limits. His silver hair caught the projector glow as he leaned forward, smiling. "Excellent work, son," he said, voice rich with pride. "This is the future I've been waiting for." The word future lodged somewhere between my ribs. Ethan nodded, his tone modest but perfectly calculated. "It's really a team effort. I'm grateful for the foundation this company already built." Foundation. Another stolen word. The applause rose again. Chairs scraped, pens clicked, people exchanged excited whispers about rebranding, new investors, modern architecture. My father's assistant leaned toward him, murmuring something about a press release. I sat motionless, my notebook still open to the last page of my original Silverline draft. When the lights brightened, the meeting shifted to casual chatter. Coffee cups clinked, chairs rolled. My father shook hands with the senior partners while Ethan answered questions about his concept. I watched his lips form my explanations word for word. "Green terraces across mixed-use blocks reduce thermal gain," he said. That sentence had been mine. Even the pause he used before thermal gain was mine. I forced my fingers to stop trembling. I shut the notebook gently, pretending calm. If anyone noticed the stiffness in my shoulders, they mistook it for professionalism. The partners began to leave, filing out with polite nods. Compliments followed Ethan like perfume. "She's proud, you can tell," one of them whispered to another, mistaking my silence for admiration. I waited until only 3 people remained in the room: my father, Ethan, and the company lawyer in his gray suit. They were speaking near the window where sunlight fractured across the glass. From where I sat, I could see their reflections merge into one silhouette. Ethan's voice lowered. "Make sure the paperwork is finalized before she finds out." The lawyer nodded once, slipped a thick envelope into his briefcase, and left. I didn't move. My throat went dry. "Before she finds out." Finds out what? Father clapped Ethan on the shoulder, the way he used to do with me when I was still the company's rising star. Then they both turned toward the skyline as if admiring the empire they had just secured. I gathered my things quietly and left. The hallway stretched long and bright, lined with framed photos of our completed projects: bridges, stadiums, housing complexes that had shaped parts of the city. I used to feel pride every time I walked this corridor. Now the photos looked like accusations. Inside the elevator, I pressed the button to the ground floor and watched my reflection multiply in mirrored walls. Perfect hair, neutral lipstick, white blouse, gray blazer, every detail carefully assembled to look competent and calm. Inside, something had already started to fracture. When the doors opened, the ordinary rhythm of the office hit me like noise from another planet. Phones ringing, printers humming, keyboards clattering, the espresso machine sputtering steam. None of these people knew that their entire hierarchy had just shifted without a sound. I stepped outside. The air was cold and smelled faintly of asphalt and river wind. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring up at the building that bore my family's name in polished chrome letters. Andrews Structure Group. The name had always felt like armor. Now it looked like a wall built to keep me out. I walked to the parking lot in slow steps. Each one echoed in the underground level where sound carried easily. When I reached my car, I didn't start it right away. My hands rested on the steering wheel as memories uncoiled. My first site inspection at 19, when a worker had called me Little Miss Manager and laughed. My first winter budget crisis, when I stayed 3 nights straight in the office until we found a solution. The letter from the mayor's office praising our project for saving the city $2 million in energy costs. Every one of those victories had felt like a promise whispered between me and my father. "One day, this will all be yours," he had said once, his hand heavy on my shoulder, his voice sure. Now I wondered if he ever meant it. I turned the key. The engine hummed, headlights cutting through concrete gloom. Instead of driving home, I turned toward the river. The Charles flowed dark and patient under the bridge. Lights from passing cars streaked across its surface like fractured glass. I parked by the embankment and sat in silence, letting the heater run. My phone buzzed twice with company emails, meeting notes, schedule updates. I swiped them away. None of it mattered anymore. I tried to tell myself it was only a project, not a betrayal. But the lie crumbled before it reached my lips, before she finds out. Whatever that envelope contained, I was not supposed to see it. And that was exactly why I would. I returned to the office building after dark. Security recognized me, nodded without question. The corridors were half-lit, emptied of chatter. My heels sounded sharper now. I went straight to the archive floor, the one place where the company still smelled like the old days, paper and dust and ink. The fluorescent light above the cabinets flickered, buzzing softly. I keyed in the code and opened the door. Metal drawers waited like rows of coffins. I started searching. Silver-lined drafts, financial records, department backups, nothing irregular. Then I found a folder titled Corporate Holdings Updated. Modified 2 weeks ago. The same week Ethan came home. My stomach tightened. I hesitated, fingers resting on the mouse. Some part of me whispered not to look, that knowing might change everything. But curiosity is a kind of gravity. Once you feel its pull, resistance is useless. I double-clicked. The list appeared: ownership transfer protocol, board voting structure, share realignment. Legal documents, all dated and signed. My breath hitched. I scrolled quickly, scanning names. Henry Andrews, Ethan Andrews, the Andrews Group Trust, no Raven Andrews, not even as a minor shareholder. I stared at the screen until the text blurred. A single drop of water hit the keyboard. I realized it was sweat from my temple, not a tear. So that was what the envelope contained. The future of the company without me. A sound came from the hallway, a soft footstep, then another. I turned off the monitor. Eleanor, our records manager, peeked in. Her face was pale in the half-light. "Raven, what are you doing here this late?" "Checking something," I said. My voice came out too calm. Why wasn't I informed about the latest holdings update? Her eyes flicked to the folder on the screen, then back to me. A pause long enough to be an answer. "Your father wanted to wait until everything was settled," she said quietly. "He thought you'd understand." Understand what? That I had built a fortress just to be written out of its deeds. She opened her mouth again but stopped, then whispered, "Raven, you should go home, please." I saved a copy of the file to a small USB drive and slipped it into my pocket. When I stepped back into the corridor, the air felt thinner, as if the building itself had changed shape. Maybe it had. By the time I reached the street, Boston was sleeping under a veil of mist. The neon sign of a late-night diner blinked across from the parking lot, pale red on wet pavement. I stood there, breathing slowly until my heartbeat steadied. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought I'd keep showing up, loyal and blind. But tomorrow, they would see that I had finally opened my eyes. I barely slept that night. The city outside my window pulsed with the dull heartbeat of traffic, but my mind moved faster than any car on those empty streets. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words on that folder again, my name missing from the company I had given half my life to. At some point, around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and the USB drive lying in front of me like a tiny black secret. I plugged it into my laptop. The documents opened again, their words clean and merciless. Transfer of 68% ownership to Ethan Andrews. The remaining shares divided between Henry Andrews and the Andrews Family Trust, effective immediately. No clause for temporary allocation, no mention of reconsideration, no Raven Andrews. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I had always believed betrayal had a sound, a door slamming, a voice raised, a shattering plate. But this one was silent. It had happened in meeting rooms and lawyer offices, sealed with pens and signatures, dressed up as business logic. By dawn, the streets turned gray and soft under the first light. I put the drive back in my purse and changed into my usual office clothes out of habit. Then I stopped, standing in front of the mirror. Why was I still wearing their colors? Why was I still preparing to walk into a place that had already erased me? I took off the blazer, unbuttoned the white shirt, and threw both onto the chair. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't dress to be part of Andrew's group. I dressed for myself, black jeans, a charcoal turtleneck, my hair tied loosely instead of the perfect bun they expected. By 8, I was driving through Beacon Hill toward the old red brick house that used to feel like home. The Andrews family house sat behind an iron gate wrapped in winter ivy. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned, surprised, a wooden spoon still in her hand. "Raven," she said with that bright, fragile tone parents use when they sense a storm. "You're early. Your father's still upstairs. Breakfast?" "No," I said. "I won't stay long." She glanced at the clothes I wore, the lack of makeup, the tired lines under my eyes. Her expression softened, but she didn't ask. My father appeared moments later, adjusting his cufflinks, the same navy suit he wore yesterday. He paused when he saw me. "You're not at work?" "I came here first," I said. "We need to talk." Ethan arrived last, carrying a laptop and a half-eaten apple. He smiled faintly. "Morning, sis. Everything okay?" I placed the black folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood made everyone stop. "Where did you get that?" my father asked. "From the archives," I replied. "It was easy once I knew where to look." He exhaled, slow, rehearsed. "I was going to tell you. When? After the next press release, or after the next award with his name on it?" "Don't start," he said sharply. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word burned. I had spent years building this company from the inside out, and now my own father was telling me that outrage was an exaggeration. I flipped the folder open, showing them the signatures, the stamp. "You transferred nearly 70% of the company to Ethan. You gave him everything, control, voting rights, equity, and left me with nothing. Why?" Ethan set down his apple carefully. "Dad wanted to ensure stability," he said, as if reciting from a script. "Investors respond better to a unified front. We can't have multiple decision makers confusing the brand identity." I laughed once, short and bitter. "Brand identity? You mean my work, my ideas, my blood, sweat, and every sleepless night you two were too comfortable to notice." My mother touched my arm. "Raven, please, let's sit." "No," I said, stepping back. "I'm done sitting." For a moment, no one spoke. The kitchen clock ticked loud enough to count the silence. My father broke it first. "You're brilliant, but you're rigid. You run this company like an engine room, not a brand. We need vision. Ethan brings that. You can't build an empire on spreadsheets and discipline." "An empire?" I said quietly. "Empires collapse from the inside when the builders are betrayed." Ethan looked down, my father didn't. "Raven, we're not erasing you," he continued, his tone softening as if he believed that made it mercy. "You'll always have a place here, but leadership requires flexibility. It's not personal, it's evolution." I closed the folder and slid it back toward him. "Then evolve without me?" He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I resign," I said. "Effective immediately." My mother gasped. Ethan opened his mouth but didn't find words. "You can't just walk away," my father said. "I can," I replied, "because you already made it clear this place isn't mine." I turned toward the door. My mother reached out, her fingers brushing my sleeve. "Raven, please, this family," I said softly, "sign me away." I walked out before they could answer. The air outside was colder than before. My breath came out in small clouds as I crossed the porch. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mother's voice break and my father saying something about pride. The gate clicked shut behind me, sealing the sound away. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from clarity. It felt like oxygen rushing back after years of breathing recycled air. As I drove away, the city opened ahead like a blueprint waiting to be redrawn. I passed the river, the cranes, the skeletons of half-built towers, all those structures that had been my life. I wondered how many of them would stand 10 years from now, and how many would crumble from the same arrogance that now ruled my father's boardroom. I stopped at a small cafe near the wharf, a place I used to visit back in college. The same barista worked there, older now, but she recognized me. "Still coffee with 2 sugars?" she asked. "Still," I said, smiling faintly. When I sat down, I opened my laptop again. The screen reflected my face, pale in the morning light. On the desktop, the USB icon blinked like a heartbeat. I dragged it into a new folder titled Start Over. For the first time, the name felt right. I wasn't sure what I was building yet. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let the Andrews name define the limits of my worth. They could keep the buildings, the brand, the fame. I would build something cleaner, sharper, freer. something that could not be stolen by signatures. The coffee cooled as I typed. Ideas began to take shape, names, budgets, designs. My hands moved faster. Hours passed unnoticed. By noon, the outline of a new company existed in my documents, Nova Constructs. A simple phrase, but to me it meant everything. From ashes, structure. I leaned back, exhaled, and felt something inside me settle for the first time in months. Outside, the city was waking into its noisy rhythm again, construction trucks, bus horns, snippets of conversation in the wind. It sounded like possibility. I finished the last line of my initial plan, closed the laptop, and whispered to myself, "This time, no one takes it away." When night came, I returned to my apartment with a kind of calm I hadn't known before. I didn't cry, didn't replay the argument. I simply sat by the window with a notebook and wrote lists, contacts I could trust, engineers who had quietly supported me, suppliers who owed me favors. The notebook filled quickly, each line another piece of scaffolding for what would come next. Around midnight, I stood and looked out at the city lights. They shimmered like stars trapped in glass. Somewhere in those lights was the office tower where my family celebrated Ethan's success. Somewhere else, hidden among older streets, would soon rise my own foundation. Maybe betrayal wasn't an ending after all. Maybe it was demolition, the necessary collapse before reconstruction. Either way, tomorrow would be the first day of something entirely mine. The first morning after quitting felt almost foreign. For 10 years, my days began with the same rhythm. The smell of coffee at 5, the blue light of the first email by 5:30, the hum of construction updates from site managers before the sun even rose. Now the silence in my apartment was so absolute that it pressed against my ears. The city outside was still half asleep, its skyline veiled by mist from the river. I sat by the window with a notebook open on my knees, the same one I had filled with names and plans the night before. The word Nova stared back at me from the first page, crisp, underlined twice, like it already belonged somewhere carved into glass. When I left the Andrews name behind, I thought freedom would taste sweet. It didn't. It tasted like metal and adrenaline and fear. I made a list of what I had left: a decade of contacts, my reputation among engineers, 3 small savings accounts, and 1 burning desire not to disappear. That was enough. By noon, I was walking through the industrial district where we used to lease temporary offices for site coordination. The smell of concrete dust hit me like a memory. The ground still carried marks of tire tracks from old company trucks, the same trucks that once answered to me. I passed one parked near the corner, the logo Andrews Structure Group faded but still visible. My chest tightened, but I kept walking. A small building with cracked windows and a faded for lease sign caught my attention. The space was nothing more than a hollow rectangle of gray walls and uneven floor. Yet when I stepped inside, I could already imagine desks, plans, and a banner with a different name across the entrance. The landlord, an older man with oil stains on his jacket, looked me over skeptically. "You're starting a construction firm?" "Yes," I said. "On your own, for now." He smiled in that way people do when they expect you to fail but don't want to sound cruel. "Well, the rent's cheap. 2 months up front." I wrote the check before he finished the sentence. When I turned the key in the lock for the first time, dust scattered through the light. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. It wasn't much, but it was mine. By evening, I had dragged an old folding table from storage and set up my laptop on it. The hum of its fan filled the emptiness. I pinned a single piece of paper to the wall, a simple sketch of a circular district surrounded by greenery, my earliest concept for sustainable modular housing. That drawing had been rejected twice by my father for being too idealistic. Now it would be the heart of my new firm. I spent hours drafting the company mission statement, trying to capture the essence of what I wanted Nova to be. We build not to impress, but to endure. The words came easily, as if they had been waiting for me all along. When fatigue finally caught up, I sat back and closed my eyes. Images from the past drifted through my mind, nights in the office when the lights stayed on long after everyone left, the smell of fresh asphalt after rain, the laughter of workers during lunch breaks. I missed all of it, even the exhaustion. Yet underneath that nostalgia was something else, anger, raw and alive. Anger had a strange kind of energy. It built foundations faster than ambition ever did. The next morning, I called 5 people. First was Lena Cho, one of the most talented architects I had ever met, who left Andrew's group after a disagreement with Ethan over design direction. "Raven," she said when she picked up, half laughing, "are you calling to tell me you've finally strangled your brother?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm calling to start over. I'm opening a new firm." She was quiet for 3 seconds then, Where and when do I start? Second was Marcus Reed, project manager, sharp, restless, always felt stifled by hierarchy. I thought you'd never leave that place, he said. Turns out they left me first, he chuckled. Then let's build something they'll regret ignoring. By the time I hung up the fifth call, I had a skeleton team. They didn't care about salary yet, just the chance to work without red tape. For lunch, we met in the bare office. The only furniture was the folding table and a few crates turned into chairs. We ate sandwiches out of paper wrappers, laughing like people who had nothing left to lose. This place smells like ghosts, Marcus said. Then we'll fill it with noise, I replied. The kind that builds. We started listing immediate needs: a drafting printer, software licenses, insurance, paperwork. Everything cost money I didn't have, but somehow the fear felt manageable. When the team left that night, I stayed behind to clean up. The floor was rough, catching light from the street lamp through the blinds. I traced my fingers along the wall where the paint was peeling. Beneath the gray, a faint layer of blue showed, old and faded but still there. It reminded me of the undercoat of a building before the final layer seals it in. Imperfect, honest. That was how I wanted Nova to be. At midnight, I received a text from an unknown number. Eleanor, are you awake? I frowned. Eleanor had been with Andrew's group longer than I'd been alive. Me, yes. Why? Eleanor, just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Don't let them make you doubt what you built. My throat tightened. I typed back, thank you, then stared at the screen until it dimmed. For the first time since the boardroom meeting, I felt something like warmth. Still, I knew this was only the calm before the next wave. Henry Andrews never tolerated defiance. If word reached him that I was starting my own company, he would not stay silent. But I wasn't the same person he could silence with authority anymore. I was learning that cracks in concrete aren't weaknesses. They're proof of pressure, endured evidence that the structure survived even when it shouldn't have. And beneath every crack, if you look closely enough, something new is already forming. The first week at Nova was chaos disguised as progress. We worked out of folding tables and borrowed laptops. Half our power sockets sparked when we plugged in heavy equipment, and the old radiator made a sound like someone breathing in the walls. But there was momentum, and that was all I needed. Every morning I arrived before everyone else, pushing open the heavy door to find the smell of dust and fresh coffee. I played soft music through my phone just to fill the silence. It reminded me of the construction sites in my early days, messy, loud, full of possibility. Lena brought blueprints rolled inside her backpack. Marcus dragged in whiteboards from a friend's closed office. By day 3, the floor was covered with plans and cables. We had no sign outside, no receptionist, not even a logo. But when people walked in, they could feel something alive humming beneath the bare walls. Our first goal was survival. Land one small contract before rent was due again. Lena and Marcus suggested we target private housing developers. I preferred municipal infrastructure because that's where my experience lay. After hours of argument, we compromised: an eco-housing pilot project announced by the city council. The proposal deadline was 2 weeks away. I spent the next nights building the design model myself. The office lights stayed on until dawn. My eyes burned, my hands ached, but the feeling was familiar, not despair, but creation. Every click of the mouse, every new line on the blueprint was a declaration. I'm still here. 2 days before the deadline, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Raven Andrews? Yes. This is Jordan Wells, City Procurement. You've received your submission under the name Nova Constructs. Are you free tomorrow for a preliminary interview? My heart jumped. Yes, what time? 10 a.m., City Hall, Conference Room C. When I hung up, Lena and Marcus were watching me expectantly. We're in, I said. They both cheered, loud enough to wake the pigeons nesting outside the window. That night, we rehearsed potential questions until the walls echoed with our voices. Marcus played devil's advocate, grilling me like a hostile investor. Lena scribbled design notes faster than I could talk. Around 2 a.m, the power went out. We sat there in the dark, laughing, the glow of laptop batteries casting small halos on our faces. For the first time since leaving Andrew's group, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was running toward it. The next day, the interview panel sat behind a long mahogany table. There were 3 officials and 1 external consultant, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair. Her nameplate read E. Donovan. She studied our proposal in silence while I explained our design: modular housing that could adapt to both city and suburban environments using recycled materials and renewable systems. When I finished, she leaned forward. Your concept is ambitious, Ms. Andrews. Why should the council trust a firm with no track record? I met her gaze. Because every person in this team has built cities before, just under other people's names. We're done building shadows. The room went quiet, then slowly she smiled. Ambition with backbone, she said. We'll be in touch. 3 days later, the email came. Subject, congratulations, Nova Construct selected for Phase I contract. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I could breathe. We had done it. Marcus burst into the room, saw my face, and shouted, "We got it!" I nodded. The office erupted into cheers. Lena hugged me so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. We celebrated with cheap wine and music from someone's playlist. It wasn't a big victory. The contract barely covered expenses, but symbolically it meant everything. I messaged Alina that evening. We signed our first deal. Her reply came instantly, "They'll notice." She was right. The very next week, my father's assistant called. "Mr. Andrews would like to meet with you." I almost laughed. He's still using assistants to send messages? He insists it's urgent. Tell him I'm busy building the company he said I couldn't. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I stared out the window of the office. Across the city skyline, the Andrews Group tower glowed, a glass monolith crowned with our old family logo. It felt less like a monument and more like a warning. Part of me wanted to call him, to ask why, to demand the acknowledgement I'd never received. But another part, the part that had learned to stand alone, stayed silent. Some debts were better collected through success, not confrontation. Weeks passed. Nova grew stronger. We hired 2 interns, then a logistics coordinator. Clients started visiting. We still couldn't afford real furniture, but there was laughter in the halls, and that was more valuable than luxury. Late one night, while I reviewed construction schedules, a notification popped up, a news headline. Andrews Structure Group announces expansion under Ethan Andrews. I clicked. A glossy photo filled the screen, my brother standing beside our father, both smiling for the press. The caption read, "Visionary leadership meets tradition." I almost closed it, but one detail caught my eye. Behind them, on a large screen, was a layout, familiar lines, familiar curves. The Silver Line District again. Except this time, the presentation included additions to the original plan: parks, sustainable grids, community hubs. Every change matched the development notes from my old laptop, notes that were never uploaded to the company server. He had stolen those too. A sharp pulse went through my chest. I stood so fast my chair fell over. The document on the screen felt like a ghost reaching out of the past. I checked timestamps on my archived files, still intact, untouched, with my author's signature embedded. He couldn't erase that. For a moment, I just stared at my reflection in the dark monitor. They hadn't learned anything. They still believed I would stay silent. The next morning, I met with my team. I didn't tell them everything, not yet, but they could see the shift in me. "What happened?" Lena asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just realized the old empire is starting to crack." Marcus smirked. "You sound like someone planning revenge." "Not revenge," I said. "Restoration." They laughed, but I didn't. After everyone left, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line: "Find out what they're planning with Silverline." It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was precision, the same calm I used to pour foundations. You can't fight a structure by hitting it head-on. You find the fault line, the hidden weakness, and you press until it gives way. And I knew exactly where to start. I sent a message to Alina: "Lunch tomorrow. I need to ask about a project, confidentially." Her reply came within minutes. "You found something, didn't you?" Maybe, I wrote back, or maybe I'm just tracing a crack to see how deep it runs. When I closed my laptop, the night outside was heavy with rain. Drops slid down the window, distorting the city lights. I watched them streak downward, merging and splitting again until they disappeared at the edge of the glass. That was how corruption worked, spreading quietly, seeping into everything, invisible until it shattered the surface. But I had built my life on understanding cracks. I knew exactly how to follow one until the whole wall came down. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed clean but hollow. When morning came, the streets outside shimmered under the first slice of sunlight, but inside me nothing felt bright. I stared at the folder on my desk, screenshots, internal documents Alina had slipped me late last night. They confirmed everything. The new Silverline proposal filed under Andrews Group wasn't just inspired by my design. It was a line-by-line copy, down to the energy flow chart I had drawn in my notebook 3 years ago. The only difference was the name at the bottom corner. Creative Director, Ethan Andrews. For 10 minutes I just sat there, fingers pressed against my temples. Betrayal, I was learning, had many shades. Some shouted, others smiled while they signed. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Mom, dinner tonight." Family only. "Your father wants to talk." I almost laughed out loud. The timing was perfect or cruel, maybe both. I'll be there. When I looked around the office, the early light made our space glow soft and golden. Lena was sketching cross-sections near the window. Marcus argued with a contractor over speakerphone. They had no idea what storm was coming. I didn't want to drag them into it, not yet. At 6:30, I drove toward the old red brick house on Brookline Avenue. The sky was already bleeding orange into purple. I hadn't been there since the morning I quit. The gate creaked open like something reluctant to remember. The porch light was on. Through the dining room window, I saw shadows moving, my father at the table, Ethan pouring wine, my mother arranging plates with her careful, nervous rhythm. Everything looked almost the same, but something in the air felt wrong, too staged, too quiet. When I stepped inside, the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken wrapped around me like a memory I didn't want. My mother's face brightened. "Raven, sweetheart, you came." I said I would. She tried to hug me, but I kept my hands at my sides. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. My father glanced up from his seat at the head of the table. "Sit down, Raven. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I pulled out a chair, the same one I'd used since childhood, the one with a faint scratch on the backrest from when I carved my initials at 12. For a moment, the past and present collided, the little girl who used to draw city skylines on napkins and the woman sitting now, bracing herself for war. Ethan poured me a glass of red. "Peace offering," he said lightly. I didn't touch it. "You'll need stronger than wine." He chuckled, but it died quickly when he saw my expression. The first 20 minutes were painfully polite. My mother spoke about weather, about how the lilacs were late blooming this year, about a new cafe near the river. My father nodded occasionally, but his gaze kept returning to me, measuring, calculating. Ethan filled the silence with stories about investors, interviews, awards. He sounded exactly like my father in his younger days, confident, charming, unaware that arrogance wears thin. Finally, I set my fork down. The sound was soft but final. "Stop pretending." My mother froze, my father's jaw tightened. Ethan sighed. "Here we go. I know about Silverline," I said. "Every detail, every file you pulled from my archives, every revision you renamed. I know the city proposal was filed under your name last week." Ethan leaned back. "You're mistaken." "I'm not. The embedded metadata still carries my signature ID. You didn't even bother to erase it." He went pale for a moment, then masked it with a smirk. "It's just business, Raven. You left the company, we built on what was already there, that's how progress works." My father cleared his throat. "Enough, this isn't the place." "No, this is exactly the place," I said quietly, "because this is where it all started, this table, this family, every promise that turned into paperwork." He glared at me. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being factual." For the first time in years, his composure slipped. "You walked away. You can't accuse us of stealing something you abandoned." "I didn't abandon it," I said. "You took it." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Even the sound of the clock seemed hesitant. My mother's voice broke the stillness. "Raven, your father thought?" "Don't," I cut in. "Please don't justify it. You both watched me work myself into exhaustion for 10 years, and when I finally built something worth recognition, you gave it away because it came from the wrong child." Ethan pushed his chair back, temper flaring. "This again, you always think you're the victim." "I'm not the victim," I said. "I'm the builder, you're the thief who redecorates." His face flushed red. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You'll sue me, you'll plagiarize another project and hope no one notices." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" The plates rattled. My mother gasped softly. I met his eyes. The same gray-blue I had inherited, though his now looked colder. "Tell me one thing, then I'll leave," I said. "If I hadn't found those files, would you have ever told me?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was too heavy to speak. I nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." I stood, took the glass of wine Ethan had poured earlier, and emptied it into the sink. "This isn't anger," I said, turning back to them. "It's clarity. You taught me how to build structures strong enough to stand alone. You just never thought I'd use that lesson against you." Walk to the doorway. My mother whispered my name, voice trembling. "Raven, please, don't do anything you'll regret." I paused. "The only regret I have," I said softly, "is believing this family was built on love instead of ownership." Then I left. Outside, the air had turned cold again. I didn't realize I was shaking until I reached the car and saw my hands on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The house behind me glowed warmly through its windows, like a photograph of happiness staged for outsiders. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Unknown, you were brave tonight. They won't admit it, but they're terrified." I stared at the text. No name, but I knew the tone. Eliner, me? How do you know? Eliner, because I'm still there. And tomorrow morning you'll want to see something. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. What is it? I typed, but she didn't reply. Only 3 blinking dots appeared, then disappeared, leaving me alone with the glow of the screen and a feeling that the story I thought was ending had only just begun. I drove through the sleeping city, headlights carving narrow tunnels of light through fog. Somewhere above, cranes stood frozen against the sky, waiting for dawn. I wondered how many more cracks would appear before everything finally collapsed, and whether I would be the one holding the detonator when it did. I did not sleep. The city wore its insomnia like a thin coat of light, and I wore mine like a fever. The words from the dinner table would not let me rest. Thief who redecorates, you are being dramatic. It all replayed against the ceiling as if the plaster itself were a screen for our family theater. At 5:30 the phone vibrated again. Eliner, meet me by the river in 40 minutes. Bench near the old ferry sign. I dressed in dark clothes and tied my hair back without thinking. The streets were wet from a late misting rain. When I reached the river, the sky was a strip of pale silver over low clouds. Eliner was already on the bench, wrapped in a wool coat, a paper cup warming her hands. Her eyes looked tired but clear. You brought the city to a standstill last night, she said. I sat beside her. I did not bring anything to a standstill. I wrecked a dinner. She gave a small smile. In families like ours, the dinner table is a proxy war. Believe me, you did more than overturn plates. She lifted a slim folder from her bag and set it between us. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a printout of the city proposal for Silverline as filed by Andrew's group. Ethan's name in bold. My diagrams beneath it. Embedded metadata notations. A second document followed, an internal memo from legal. I read the header and felt heat rising to my face. Contingency Plan B, protecting corporate IP in anticipation of external claims. Read the line below, Eliner murmured. If the former employee Raven A asserts ownership, proceed to file for emergency injunction citing work for hire provisions and Section 12 of the 2018 Confidentiality and Innovations Agreement. I ran my thumb over the page, as if the paper might give way and reveal a more merciful script beneath. The 2018 Agreement. I remembered the year, a time when I was too busy saving a project to read the legal updates HR sent at midnight. I had signed quickly, trusting the family name stamped on the header. There is more, Eliner said gently. She handed me a single sheet, a calendar printout. Tomorrow at 11, a closed-door briefing was scheduled in our old boardroom. Attendees included Henry, Ethan, 2 city consultants, and a representative from a private fund I recognized. They were not only claiming my work, they were preparing to sell the expansion rights before the council even voted. I let the papers rest in my lap, felt the weight of them like wet stone. For a long time, we listened to the wind move over the water. A single gull skimmed the surface and rose again, white leaves against gray. Why are you helping me? I asked. Eliner looked at the river instead of me. Because you built the spine of that company and no one will say it out loud. Because you are the only person in that family who learned to listen more than you spoke. Because I watched you carry the place through storms while men with nicer ties took the photos. Her voice thinned. And because I am tired of filing papers that erase the people who earned them. I folded the folder shut and slid it into my bag. What happens if I challenge them? I said. They will point to the innovations agreement. They will paint Nova as a shell for stolen work. They will make me the villain of a story I wrote. Then do not challenge them the way they expect, she said. Use what they fear, not noise, proof, timestamps, chain of custody, independent witnesses. Do it by their rules and you will make the rules your weapon. I nodded. For the first time since the boardroom, I felt something colder than anger, precision. It was almost a relief. Eliner stood, smoothing the coat at her hips. They think you will walk into the meeting and shout. Promise me you will not walk into the meeting and shout. I smiled without humor. I am done shouting. Good, she said, because storms are loud, but erosion wins. She left me with the river and the morning. I went straight to the office. The door stuck in the same place as always, and I pushed it open with my shoulder. Inside, the lights were off and the room smelled like pencil shavings and coffee. I set the folder on the table and powered up my laptop. The screen came to life slowly, then flared into clarity. For the next 3 hours, I worked without lifting my head. I compiled original drafts with embedded authorship signatures, export logs, version history screenshots, email threads with timestamps and location tags. I added photos from my phone of model iterations on my apartment floor from the year before last, my own handwriting in the margins of the foam board. I exported a single document that stitched the years together into a line that could not be cut. By 9, Lena arrived with wind in her hair, a pastry in a paper bag, and the kind of eyes that see more than you want them to. "Bad night?" she asked. "We may have to be ready earlier than we thought," I said. She watched my hands for a beat and did not press. She started the printer without another word, and the office filled with the soft, rhythmic shuffle of pages coming to life. At 10:30, I sent a short email to the city consultant with whom we had spoken during our Phase I meeting. It was not an accusation and not a plea. I simply attached an evidence bundle of my authorship and asked that any review of Silverline include a standard intellectual property diligence step. Routine language, professional tone. The kind of message ignored only by people who preferred risk to reputation. Then I sat back and waited for a reply that did not come. By 10:55, I closed the laptop and stood. "Where are you going?" Lena asked. "To watch them sign a future that does not belong to them," I said. "Do you want backup?" she offered. "Not today. But keep your phone near you, and if I do not answer a call by noon, send our evidence package to the council clerk and copy legal." She did not like that plan. She nodded anyway. The elevator ride at Andrew's group was exactly as I remembered it. The mirrored panels, the faint scent of metal polish, floors lighting up one by one like cards turning over in a rigged game. When the doors slid open on the executive level, the carpet gave beneath my shoes like water. The receptionist looked up and smiled before her training caught up with memory and the smile faltered. "Raven, do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "I am early for a memory." She flushed in confusion. I walked past before she could form a policy-approved sentence. Through the glass wall, I could see them assembling. My father at the head, Ethan near the screen, the private fund representative checking his watch, the city consultant arranging papers. The legal counsel set a metal water bottle down with the same casual precision he used to set down a pen before pressing me to sign something I should have read. I did not open the door. I leaned against the opposite wall and watched my reflection stand between me and their future. The clock above the hallway vent ticked in a tone I had never noticed before. It sounded like a machine counting down. 11:00. The meeting door clicked. I pushed myself upright and turned away. I did not need to witness another theft. I needed to set the consequence in motion. In the elevator, I took out my phone and opened a draft I had prepared on the ride up. It was addressed to the private fund representative, whose signature would commit millions to expanding a project built on a lie. The subject line was plain. Standard IP diligence note for Silverline due to conflicting authorship records. I attached the evidence package and a brief statement that I would be happy to present a timeline to any impartial reviewer. I hit send and felt the tiny vibration acknowledge departure. At the lobby, the receptionist was on the phone. Her voice carried across the marble. "Yes," she said. "She was here." "No, she is leaving now." "Yes," she looked calm. That last sentence almost made me laugh. Outside, the wind lifted and pushed hair across my face. I crossed the plaza and did not look back. At the corner, a delivery truck stalled traffic and someone shouted from a taxi. The city never changed for private wars. It simply absorbed them and went on. My phone rang while I was waiting to cross. Unknown number, Washington Exchange. "This is Alina Donovan, the external consultant retained by the city. We met in the first interview. Do you have a moment?" I stepped into the shadow of a building and pressed the phone closer. "Yes, I received a copy of your evidence from a council contact," she said. "If what you sent is accurate, the current Silverline proposal cannot proceed without review." "Is the council aware yet?" I asked. "They will be in an hour. Do you wish to file a formal complaint?" "No, I do not wish to be the story. I wish the work to be the story and the truth to be the ground it stands on." There was a pause and then a sound like a nod traveling through a wire. "That is the first sensible sentence I have heard this week. I will be in touch before the day ends." When the call ended, my hands were suddenly cold. For a minute, I leaned against the stone and watched steam rise from a street grate. The world was moving, quietly, under the surface. I walked back to Nova. The door stuck in the same place, and I pushed it open with my shoulder. The room felt warmer than it had that morning. Marcus was on a call, pinching the bridge of his nose in the way he did when a contractor tried to slip a weak substitute into a bill of materials. Lena looked up with a question that was also a warning. "Not yet," I said. "But soon." At 12:19, the first email arrived. The private fund had paused discussions with Andrew's group pending verification of intellectual property claims. At 12:32, Alina sent a message with no text and a single attachment, a photograph taken through a glass wall. It showed my father standing with his hands on the back of a chair and Ethan with his jaw set hard, as if biting down on something that tasted like iron. The city consultant in the photo had both hands open in a gesture that looked like a man asking a room to breathe. At 12:40, my phone lit up with my father's name. I watched it ring until the call expired. A minute later, it rang again. I let it go. When he finally stopped, he sent a text that began with my name and ended with a period, as if the rest of the sentence had broken on the way out. I turned to the window. A pale sun had burned through the clouds and laid a bar of light across our floor. It touched the bottom of the pinned sketch on the wall, the earliest version of what they had tried to rename. Marcus hung up and exhaled. "Do we celebrate?" he asked. "Not yet. This is not a victory. This is a stop sign." He looked at the sun on the floor and nodded. "A stop sign is good. It is red and it is loud." The afternoon moved on in small tasks. I reviewed schedules. Lena marked up a facade detail. Marcus untangled logistics for a shipment that had turned the wrong way somewhere on the highway. We worked like people who trusted that motion could keep a body warm when the weather turned. At 4, Alina called again. Her voice was softer now. "They have postponed the signature," she said. "The board wants private counsel to review the history before they step forward." And Raven? "Yes, he is angry." "Which one?" I asked. "Both." I waited for fear. It did not come. What arrived instead was a strange sense of fairness. They had built a theater for a coronation. I had flipped the lights to white and asked to see the receipts. "Thank you," I said. "I am not doing this for thanks," she replied. "I am doing this for correct filing." When the call ended, I sat alone for a minute. The office hummed with an ordinary evening sound. Street noise. A printer resting. Someone laughing in the hall outside from another suite we had never met. Life happened parallel to the heaviest decisions a human can make. That was one of adulthood's quiet truths. You sign your name to a storm while passing someone taking out the trash. I packed the folder and locked it in a drawer. Before I left, I wrote a single line on a yellow sticky note and pinned it under the old circular district sketch. Finish the foundation, then raise the frame. Outside, the light had turned into that brief hour when everything looks forgiven. I walked toward the river again and stood by the railing where the wind remembers. The water carried a slow current, and the city skimmed across it, broken and beautiful. I thought about the girl who carved her initials into the dining room chair. I thought about the woman who walked out of the house the night before and left the door open for air to follow her out. Somewhere between those two, a structure had formed that no one else could claim. Not a company, not a building, a spine. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unlisted number I knew as well as my own name. "You will regret this," it read. The line did not include a punctuation mark. Threats never need them. I put the phone back in my pocket. The wind pressed cold fingers through my sweater and I let it. There was no point pretending you can own the weather. You learn to build for it or you lose the house. The river kept moving. The cranes held their place like tall, patient animals. Night walked toward the city, quiet and inevitable. When it reached me, I turned and walked with it, already drawing lines in my mind for the next day. The kind you cannot see but cannot break either. The kind that tell a structure where to stand. Tomorrow would not be louder. It would be clearer. And clarity is the one material I have never seen fail. Morning came with a thin white light that made everything in the office look newly cut, as if the edges of our desks and papers had been sharpened during the night. I unlocked the door and stood for a moment without moving. The air held that quiet before a pour when the forms are set and the concrete truck turns the corner. You know the shape of what you have built, but it will not be real until you commit the mix. I turned on the lamps and set water to boil. Then I laid out the plan. I wrote the words across the top of a blank sheet of drafting paper. Exit plan, not from the family, because that exit had already happened, and not from the past, because you never leave that. This was an exit from their narrative, the one where I was the angry daughter who could not adapt, the one where work became a moon that belonged to someone else because he named it first. The plan had 4 columns: legal, operations, capital, trust. Under legal, I listed what we already had and what we could gather. Embedded authorship signatures, version histories, photographs of models with dates in the corner of the screen, emails from consultants who had praised early iterations, a short letter from a structural engineer in Vermont who remembered our lunch where I sketched load paths on a napkin. Proof mattered more than outrage. I knew that now with a clarity that felt almost like cold air in the lungs. Under operations, I wrote what Nova would look like when clients walked through our door. Not someday. This month. A real document management system. Insurance beyond bare minimum. A safety handbook made from the best of everything I had learned, not the cut and paste language companies used to satisfy regulators. I wanted the people who worked with us to feel the difference the moment they laid a hand on our rails. Under capital, I listed names that made my stomach tight. People I had helped when I still carried my father's card. People who owed me calls I never cashed. I would not ask for favors. I would offer terms built on delivery and timeline and measurable value. That was the only kind of money I trusted. Under trust, I left space. Trust could not be summoned with a to-do list. It had to be earned 1 week at a time with quiet competence. Still, I wrote 2 items. Show up early. Tell the truth when it is expensive. By the time the team arrived, the paper was full. Marcus read it with his head tilted, the way he looked at complex schedules. Lena took a photo and made a copy for the wall. You really called it the exit plan, Marcus said. We are leaving the story they wrote, I said. That requires a door. He grinned. Then let us build the hinges. The day moved quickly. I called a lawyer who had once represented a small contractor we saved from a predatory supplier. She remembered my voice and the winter we met. We spoke in clear sentences. No threat letters, not yet. A preservation notice to the parties involved. An invitation to review evidence in a neutral office. A request for written assurance that no further filings would proceed until authorship questions were resolved. She agreed to draft the letters by end of day. Her tone was dry and careful. The sound of someone who has guided people through storms without getting wet. Next, I called a man named Archero who ran a fabrication yard across the road. He had helped us rush custom beams years ago when a delivery failed and a bridge would have missed its opening ceremony. I told him what we were trying to do. Build small first. Deliver without fuss. He listened and then asked a question I did not expect. Are you going to war with them? He said. I am going to work, I said. If they call that war, that is their vocabulary. He laughed softly and gave me a price for materials I could not refuse. At noon, the light changed. The room shifted from lemon to cream. I made coffee for everyone and we stood around the folding table while I explained the next phase of Nova. A modest identity kit so clients would stop asking if we were temporary. A landing page that described what we did in plain language. Not vision, not disruption. We build cities you can live in without apology. Lena looked at the wall where that earliest sketch still hung. She said we should photograph it and place it on the first page. Not as nostalgia. As a promise that we still drew by hand before we drew by code. I nodded. We added it to the list. In the afternoon, I walked alone to a used furniture warehouse 2 streets over. The owner was a woman with paint on her jeans and a tape measure around her neck. She asked what we needed. I told her we needed a table that could take elbows and arguments and coffee without flinching. She led me to a walnut conference table with scuffs along one edge. A city planning department had used it for 2 decades before someone decided it looked tired. I ran my hand along the mark where a ring had stained the surface. It felt like a story I could trust. We paid for it with most of the funds left in our account and watched as the delivery crew slid it into our office. The room changed shape once it arrived. We arranged our chairs around it, and it felt like we had claimed a center. Near dusk, a message came from Alina Donovan. Brief, professional. The council had acknowledged receipt of the evidence and would conduct a standard review before moving any silver-line discussion forward. She did not comment on Andrew's group. She did not have to. The silence of stalled plans can be louder than headlines. I went to the window and saw cranes outlined against a narrow band of mango light. From here, you could see the river and the old ferry sign where Alina had met me. The water was high from last night's rain. It pushed against its banks with quiet conviction, like a decision already made. You are thinking about them, Lena said. I always will, I said. Families are like foundations poured too fast. They set before the bubbles are out. You build on them anyway and hope the flaws do not travel up the walls. She stood beside me. Do you want to win or be right? She asked. I thought about it. I want to build. Everything else is scaffolding. She nodded as if that was the only answer she would accept. When the others left, I stayed behind. The office had a different sound at night, not loneliness. The hum of something alive in the walls. I opened a box I had not touched in years. Inside were notebooks from my first seasons at Andrew's group. Pencil lines darkened by the oils of my hand. Post-it notes with single words. Wind, drainage, shade. I flipped through them slowly until I found a page where my father had written a sentence in the margin. Measure twice. It was not advice. It was a creed. He had taught me that and I would never forget it, even if he had forgotten me. The phone buzzed on the table. a number I knew but had not saved. I let it ring until it stopped. A text followed. "We need to talk." There was no name because he believed no name was required. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed what I wished I had said to him at the dinner table years ago when I still believed that work could make love behave. "We will talk when there is a contract on the table and a reason to sign." I did not send it. I deleted it and turned the phone face down. Instead, I sent a message to the lawyer with a simple instruction. "If you receive any letter suggesting I desist, respond with our evidence list and a request for a meeting with counsel present." No more, no less. When I finally left the office, the street was quiet. The warehouse lights across the road were off. My footsteps sounded like a metronome teaching a room to breathe. I stopped on the corner to look back through our window. The table sat like a ship waiting for a tide. The sketch on the wall held its pale circle without wavering. On the walk home, I passed a site where a crew had left rebar standing in neat rows like tall grass. The steel glowed faintly in the streetlight. I ran my fingers along one bar and felt the cold through my skin. Someday this would be a wall that held people safe in winter. Someday someone would lean against it after a long day and not think about the calculations that kept it upright. That was the kind of invisible work I loved. The kind you only noticed when it failed. Back in my apartment, I did not turn on the overhead lights. I set a lamp on low and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. The city made a low sound through the windows like distant water. I opened my laptop and wrote a message to the small circle of clients who had trusted me over the years as a person rather than a company name. I told them I had started something new. I told them what we believed. I left out everything about family and theft and anger. I ended with a sentence that surprised me as I typed it. "If we work together, I will build like the building has my name on it, even when it does not." I pressed send one by one until the list was done. Near midnight, a reply came from someone I had not expected. A property developer whose project I had saved by convincing her to pull back from a flashy facade that would have leaked heat every winter. Her message was concise. "Are you available to review a site in South Boston tomorrow at 8? Quietly. I wrote back yes and closed the computer. The river sound grew softer. I lay on the rug and looked at the ceiling. It was plain white with a tiny crack near the corner that had been there since I moved in. It had never grown, never traveled. It simply existed as proof that weight had once pressed here and the house had learned to carry it. I thought about the word exit as my eyes grew heavy. It was not a retreat. It was a door cut through a wall that had never allowed one. You do not leave a place like that and float in air. You step into a corridor you carved with your own hands. You walk until you find the stairs. Then you climb. Sleep came clean and fast. I did not dream of boardrooms or signatures. I dreamed of a site at dawn, empty and expectant, frost steaming from the ground as the first truck pulled in. I dreamed of my name written small in pencil on the corner of a drawing, not to claim it, to remember the moment it began. Morning would come in a few hours. I would be on that street in South Boston with a notebook and a tape measure and a body that had learned how to stand in cold without hurrying. The exit plan would not be a speech. It would be a footprint, then another, then a line drawn through the city no one could erase because it would be set in concrete and time. The lamp hummed. The room settled. Somewhere far away a siren rose and fell like someone practicing a scale before a concert. I smiled without opening my eyes. Tomorrow we pour. The morning at the South Boston site was pale and clean. A thin frost covered the gravel, crackling beneath my boots. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Ships moved slowly beyond the harbor wall, and the sun made the cranes look like tall bones of some forgotten animal. The developer who had written to me, her name was Carla Ross, waited by the gate wearing a hard hat too big for her. She extended a hand when she saw me. "Raven Andrews," she said, half smiling. "I wanted to see if the stories were true." "Which ones?" "The ones that say you can walk onto a dead site and hear how it used to breathe." I shrugged. "It's less poetic than that. You just listen to what the ground tells you." We walked through the skeleton of what was meant to be a mid-rise apartment block. The structure had stopped at the third floor when funding vanished. Rebar rose from the slabs like weeds. Wind passed through the empty frames, carrying the sea's cold breath. Carla explained her plan, a scaled-down version, affordable housing with mixed retail on the ground floor. She wanted it built quietly, without political noise, without the media's obsession with the Andrews name. "I don't care about the dynasty," she said. "I care about delivery." I liked her instantly. We stood at the edge of the foundation and looked down into a square pit half filled with rainwater. "It's stable," I said, but it needs reinforcement before you build again. If you pour straight over what's there, the weight will shift." She looked at me, puzzled. "You're talking about the site?" "Always," I said, though we both knew I was. She nodded. "Send me a proposal by Monday. If the numbers make sense, it's yours." When I left, the wind had picked up. The cranes turned slowly, creaking like giant weather vanes. I took a deep breath of salt air, and for the first time in weeks, the world smelled like a beginning. Back at Nova, Marcus was on the phone arguing about permits while Lena was sketching facade options in blue pencil. The table we'd bought glowed amber in the afternoon light. "How was the site?" Marcus asked, covering the receiver. "Promising," I said, and silent. "That's rare," he grinned. "Silent means cheap. Silent means free to define." I spent the next 2 days buried in numbers, load tables, cost indexes, revised designs. The rhythm of calculation was comforting. It didn't lie. It didn't flatter. You fed it truth and it returned structure. By Friday night, I had the proposal ready, not polished but alive. I printed 3 copies and set them on the table. Lena ran her thumb over the paper. "Smells like ink and hope," she said. "Let's see which one lasts longer." We sent it off before midnight. I shut the laptop and leaned back, the muscles in my neck aching. Outside, the city pulsed in sodium gold. Saturday was supposed to be quiet, but quiet is a myth in construction. At noon, my phone rang. "Eleanor, they're regrouping," she said without preamble. "The board called an emergency session this morning. They think you're courting investors with stolen funds." I laughed. "Stolen from what? We don't even have enough to steal." "Twist anything. Ethan is pushing for legal action. Henry isn't stopping him this time." The words landed like nails. "How soon?" "They're drafting the statement now. You might see it in the press Monday." The room tilted slightly. For a moment, I heard only the buzz of the fluorescent light above me. "Let them file," I said finally. "We'll answer with proof." Eleanor hesitated. "You sound too calm." "I've already lived through the worst version of them," I said, the one where they still had my trust. By Sunday evening, the rain returned, heavy, deliberate drops that made the street shimmer. I stayed in the office alone. The others had gone home after lunch, promising to rest. I told them I would too, but rest was a language I hadn't spoken in months. I opened the folder labeled Foundation Plan B, the blueprint of our defense. Every timeline, every design log, every traceable element that connected my name to the work they claimed. I added a new section: correspondence with clients, drafts of independent projects conceived after leaving Andrews. Proof that Nova wasn't born from theft but from continuity. Around 10, I turned off the lights and sat by the window. The city lights reflected on the wet street like melted gold. In the glass, my face looked older but steadier. Somewhere behind those towers, my father was probably rehearsing a speech about loyalty and legacy, explaining to investors how his daughter's defection forced his hand. I wondered if he practiced the pauses, if he still believed that silence could sound noble. At 7 Monday morning, Lena arrived with newspapers under her arm. "They moved fast," she said, dropping them on the table. The headline, "Andrews Group clarifies ownership of Silverline Designs." Beneath it, a polished paragraph filled with legal language and faintly paternal concern. "We appreciate Ms. Andrews's contributions during her tenure, but wish to clarify that all intellectual property developed under company resources remains property of Andrews Structure Group." I read it twice. It was the perfect lie, technically true, morally bankrupt. Marcus slammed his fist against the table. "They're painting you as the rebel child." "They always needed a villain," I said. "Keeps the brand wholesome," Lena frowned. "Do we respond?" "Yes," I said, "but not to them, to the council, to our clients, to anyone who matters." We spent the next hours drafting our own statement. It was short, factual, and precise. Nova Constructs was founded on original work conceived, designed, and documented by Raven Andrews prior to any formal departure from Andrews Structure Group. Evidence available upon request. No emotion. No names. Just truth set in stone. By noon, the statement was online. Within minutes, emails started coming in, support from colleagues, quiet congratulations from old partners, cautious curiosity from journalists who had been waiting for blood. I ignored the media requests. I wasn't interested in a war of words. I was interested in deadlines. At 3, my phone buzzed again. "Carla Ross." "I read the articles," she said. "Seems you're popular." "I've had worse publicity," she laughed. "Good, because the board approved the project. We're moving forward." For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. "You're serious?" "Completely. Send me your contract this afternoon." When the call ended, I sat staring at the wall. Then I laughed. It started quiet, then rose until it echoed through the room. Lena appeared in the doorway. Good news, the best kind, I said. We have our first official build. Marcus whooped so loud the people in the next office knocked on the wall. We spent the rest of the day drafting schedules, assigning roles, drawing site logistics on whiteboards. The air buzzed with a nervous joy that no accusation could dull. By evening, the light outside turned violet. The rain had stopped, leaving the street mirror-slick. I stood at the window watching headlights smear across the pavement. Behind me, the printer spat out the first official Nova Constructs contract. It wasn't the biggest job I'd ever taken. It wouldn't make headlines. But it was ours, untethered from family names and corporate ghosts. I signed the paper, the pen steady in my hand. As I capped it, I whispered to the empty room, "We pour tomorrow." The words felt like a promise, a mantra, and a warning all at once. I turned off the lights and stepped outside into the cold. The air smelled of rain and metal. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint clang of construction, the sound of something rising. For the first time in a long while, I walked toward that sound instead of away from it. The sound reached me first, a faint tremor through the phone line, like wind caught inside steel. Then the voice came, urgent, low, the kind that only calls when something is breaking. "Raven, it's a leaner. You should see this." It was 8 in the morning, the same morning our crew was pouring the first footing on the South Boston site. The smell of wet cement and diesel filled the air, rhythmic as a heartbeat. I stepped away from the noise and pressed the phone to my ear. What happened? There was an inspection at Silverline this morning. One of the retaining walls cracked. Minor so far, but they shut down the entire block. The city's structural division is coming in. Henry's furious. Ethan is panicking. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind moving through the half-finished frames around me. Somewhere a worker shouted for a level, another answered. The rhythm of construction, life continuing while something else fell apart. "Any injuries?" I asked. None reported, but the investors are already calling. They found inconsistencies between the original load specs and the version Ethan submitted. I closed my eyes. I didn't need to see the documents to know what had happened. When you build from theft, you also inherit its flaws. "Keep me updated," I said. "Raven," Aliner's voice softened, "you realize what this means." "Yes," I whispered. "It means the Foundation finally answered." By midday, the story hit the news feeds. Silverline construction halted after structural concerns. The headline was cautious, the photos less so, cracked concrete, officials in hard hats, Ethan walking behind my father with a face like marble left in the rain. At Nova, the phones buzzed nonstop. Clients wanted reassurance that we weren't connected. Competitors wanted gossip. I told the team to ignore it all and keep working. The best statement we could make was a steady hand. Still, I couldn't resist opening one of the articles. It quoted Ethan, "The situation is under control. Preliminary assessment suggests a material flaw, not a design issue." A material flaw? I almost laughed. The flaw had a name and it wasn't steel. Lena looked up from her drawings. "It's them, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "The structure's telling the truth." She leaned back, watching me. "How does it feel?" I thought for a moment. Like watching a building I warned them about finally listen. 2 days later, a leaner called again. "It's worse. The crack spread during the night. They're evacuating the equipment. The city ordered a full audit of the engineering plans. What about the investors? They're pulling out in waves. Henry's trying to keep the board calm, but Ethan's gone silent. He fired 3 site managers this morning, blames them for execution errors." The phrase made me grit my teeth. "Do you know who's leading the audit?" "Elena Donovan." Of course, the universe had a sense of humor. I looked out at our South Boston Foundation, smooth, perfect, drying under a winter sun. "Then it's already over," I said. That night I couldn't sleep. The city hummed beneath my window like a machine working too hard. I kept imagining the Silverline site, the silence after the crack, the engineers crouched with flashlights, tracing lines that told a story of greed written in stress fractures. I remembered the day I first sketched that design, sitting on the floor of my apartment surrounded by paper, music playing softly. I had written one word in the corner, balance. It was supposed to mean equilibrium between weight and resistance, but also between ambition and care. Ethan had erased that word when he copied the plans. Maybe that was the first fracture. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and opened my laptop. I wrote a single note in our internal log. Lesson 17, concrete doesn't forgive arrogance. Then I went back to bed. 3 days later, the collapse made front-page news. Not total, not the cinematic disaster the media craved, but bad enough. A partial failure of the western retaining wall sent rebar twisting like wire. No deaths, thank God, but the footage showed water flooding the excavation pit, workers running. The drone video looped on every channel. The headline read, "Silverline District Project Suspended Indefinitely." I sat in our office with the sound muted, watching it play again and again. Marcus swore softly under his breath. Lena covered her mouth with her hand. "You could have stopped this," she said finally. "I tried," I said. "They wouldn't listen." She turned to me, "And now the city will listen." I opened an email from Alina Donovan. "The council requests your presence for verification of authorship materials. 10 a.m. tomorrow, City Hall. No threat, no praise, just procedure." The language of accountability. The meeting room in City Hall smelled of paper and cold coffee. Files stacked like bricks along the table's edge. Alina sat at the far end, calm, deliberate as always. She gestured for me to sit. "Ms. Andrews, thank you for coming on short notice." "I've been waiting a long time for short notice," I said. She smiled faintly. "We've reviewed your documentation. It's extensive. The embedded authorship data aligns with your claim. Would you like to make an official statement?" I shook my head. "I don't need to humiliate them. I just want the record clean." "That's already in progress," she said. "The council will announce a correction. Ownership of the original Silverline concept will be attributed to you." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The air felt lighter. "There's something else," she added. "The city will open bids to reimagine the project under new supervision. You're welcome to apply." For a second, I couldn't speak. The irony was almost cruel. The project they stole, the one that broke them, was returning to me, not as inheritance, but as invitation. I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." When I left the building, the wind off the river was sharp and clean. The clouds had split, letting sunlight fall in angled sheets across the glass towers. The city looked raw and unfinished, like wet concrete waiting to harden. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Ethan, you win. Congratulations." I hope it was worth it. I stared at the text for a long time before replying. It wasn't about winning, Ethan. It was about telling the truth before the structure collapsed on all of us. No answer came. I stood there until the wind stung my eyes. Then I put the phone away and walked toward the river, the water shining like liquid metal. Every step felt like another piece of weight lifting off me. The collapse was more than concrete. It was history breaking under its own design, a generation of lies finally cracking enough to let light through. I wasn't sure what would rise in its place, but I knew one thing. Whatever came next, I would build it right. The day after the council review, Boston felt quieter than usual. Traffic hummed along the river, and construction cranes moved like slow metronomes against the sky, but inside the city's boardrooms, the energy had shifted. I could sense it even without stepping into the Andrews Group tower. Their empire was cracking. I arrived at Nova just as the morning sun caught the corners of our folding table. It glowed like amber. Marcus was already there, scribbling revised project timelines on a whiteboard. Lena had laid out the preliminary site sketches for our Phase I housing pilot. I set my bag down and took a deep breath. Emails were waiting, mostly congratulations from old colleagues and clients who had quietly watched the Silverline debacle. There were a few inquiries from investors, cautious questions that required tact. I skimmed them and forwarded only the ones that mattered. Proof was what I trusted. Noise was irrelevant. By 10, the first news updates appeared online. City halts Silverline project after engineering review confirms original designs were misused. The articles referenced my submissions, citing my authorship as verified by council consultants. I smiled faintly, not out of glee, but from the calm that comes when a long-buried truth finally surfaces. The phone buzzed again. "Eleanor, they are scrambling," she said. Her voice had a quiet excitement. "Henry and Ethan are trying to contain the narrative. Investors are asking for emergency meetings, and the board is panicking. They didn't anticipate that the council would validate your claims so quickly." I closed my eyes and let the words sink. I had expected resistance, legal maneuvers, maybe threats. Instead, the foundation of their power was shaking without me lifting a finger beyond documentation. "Keep watching," I said. "Nothing changes until we finish what we started." By early afternoon, the flow of information became a torrent. Reports came in that the site managers Ethan had fired were speaking to journalists. Independent audits of the Silverline blueprints were underway. Henry Andrews convened an emergency board meeting, the first to include legal counsel from outside the family firm. I stayed at Nova, reviewing our own designs, making small adjustments. The work was familiar, grounding. I realized something I had known but had almost forgot. Structures are never honest about themselves until someone listens. Lena looked up from a drawing. Do you think they know how fragile they are? I didn't answer at first. I walked to the window, watching the cranes and steel, the river catching the late sunlight. They'll find out, I said. Every empire has its weak points, they only need the right pressure. Marcus grunted. Feels poetic. Feels inevitable, I corrected. Around 3, a city consultant called, Elena Donovan again. Ms. Andrews, she said. Preliminary analysis shows multiple discrepancies in load distribution. Silverline's current plans could fail under expected capacity. Emergency measures have been enacted. The City Council is considering replacing the project leads if remediation is not approved immediately. The words landed with a weight I had expected but still marveled at. I closed my eyes. For years, I had lived through site inspections, budget crises, and staff shortages. I had never seen failure take on a form so public, so immediate. And yet, unlike before, I was not watching it happen to me. Instead, I was watching the consequences of recklessness, of hubris. By evening, Nova's small office buzzed. We had created a tracking document for our own proof, compiling photos, sketches, emails, and timeline evidence for every step we had taken. Elena had suggested adding timestamped comparisons between our submissions and the Silverline revisions filed by Andrew's group. I approved. Every line of evidence was meticulous, precise, undeniable. Marcus leaned back. You're building a courtroom dossier, not a city. I'm building accountability, I said. Everything else follows. Lena nodded. Do you think they'll understand that? They'll understand when their empire stops running without me controlling it, I said. That's when it becomes clear. The office phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message that followed was brief. Henry Andrews, call me when you are ready to discuss Silverline. I smiled faintly. My father still believed he could negotiate with authority. He had forgotten that structure is always stronger when the original architect is involved. The sky outside turned violet and then indigo. I walked to the window and traced the reflection of the cranes and the river with my eyes. Somewhere, Ethan was probably rehearsing excuses, preparing to blame anything and anyone but himself. Somewhere, Henry was trying to contain panic with charm and boardroom language. Meanwhile, we were building. The foundation of Nova Constructs, the first pilot project, the contracts we had secured quietly. The work that was hours and hours alone. By midnight, I sat at the table alone. The lights outside were dim, street lamps reflecting off wet asphalt. I opened my laptop and drafted an internal note. Lesson 18, hubris fails faster than any material. Watch, learn, record. Then I went through our documents one last time before resting my eyes. Not sleep exactly, more like temporary suspension of consciousness. The city hummed softly, cranes creaked faintly, the river glimmered. And in that moment I realized I had survived the first wave. The collapse had begun and I was standing on the one side of it that mattered. Tomorrow I would take the next step. The morning air was sharp as I walked back into the old Andrews group lobby. Marble floors, polished glass, the scent of coffee and cleaning agents, familiar and sterile. The receptionist glanced up, recognized me, and returned to her phone. I walked past without a word. Upstairs, the boardroom waited. Henry sat at the head, his expression guarded. Ethan leaned against the table, fingers drumming lightly, his confidence tempered by caution. They both expected anger, pleading, or retreat. They were wrong. I set my bag on the chair beside me and opened it slowly. No flourish, no apology. Inside were the preliminary plans for the Nova South Boston site, our proof of authorship, and a folder marked proposal for negotiation. I left the documents on the table without comment. Henry broke the silence first. Raven, you don't have to. I do, I said firmly, because I am the only one capable of saving this company from its own decisions. Ethan's lips tightened. We've managed just fine. No, I said, you've nearly destroyed it. Your Silverline project is halted, investors are panicking, the council has halted approvals, and yet you still pretend you're in control. The words landed heavier than any hammer I'd ever wielded on a construction site. I saw both of them falter. I pulled the proposal for negotiation folder closer. Here are the terms, I said. I return for one purpose, to stabilize, restructure, and protect Andrew's group. Nothing less, nothing more. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Terms. Yes, I said, leaning forward, voice steady. First, 40% of equity. Second, full authority over operational decisions in projects and personnel for all construction divisions. Third, final approval rights on budgets exceeding $1 million. Fourth, oversight of all incoming projects, including Silverline and any derivative concepts. Fifth, independent legal counsel present for all board votes pertaining to major decisions until the council validates authorship and project ownership. Henry inhaled sharply. You're asking for nearly half the company. I am asking for what is fair, I said. Not ownership for personal gain, but control sufficient to ensure the company does not collapse under incompetence. Without these terms, I will not return. Ethan leaned back. You'll ruin morale. The board won't accept it. Then they will adjust, I said, or they will watch the company crumble while I build elsewhere. I let the silence settle. The weight of it was palpable. The sound of the city filtered through the glass walls. Somewhere in Boston, cranes scraped the skyline, unaware of the small battle in this room. Henry's voice was quiet but firm. And if we refuse, I will take all evidence of my authorship, all documentation of my designs, and any ongoing projects I am involved with, and continue independently. Investors will follow. Employees will follow. Contracts already in negotiation will follow. Andrew's group will be left with legacy alone and not the capability to continue. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. I smiled faintly. Try me. Henry's hands clenched. You are being reckless. I am being precise, I said. Recklessness is signing Silverline without full verification. Precision is returning with authority. The air in the room thickened. Minutes passed. Outside, sunlight fell diagonally across the polished floor, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I watched the patterns as if they were a code. One wrong step, one misjudged pause, and this negotiation would collapse. Finally, Ethan's lips parted. 40% equity, independent oversight, authority over major budgets, and operational control. You would truly run the company as if it were your own. Yes, I said, but legally, formally, and with council verification. No verbal promises, nothing contingent on goodwill. Henry exhaled, slow and measured. You leave us little choice. No choice, I corrected, only clarity for everyone involved. They conferred quietly, the kind of silent communication only long-term collaborators understand. Minutes passed. Each tick of the wall clock echoed in my mind like the beat of a construction hammer. Ethan finally straightened and extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. Welcome back, Raven. I shook it briefly, deliberately. Thank you, I said, though it was not gratitude. It was acknowledgement of reality. Henry nodded. We will formalize this today. Contracts drafted, signatures collected, oversight in place. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension leave my shoulders. It had worked. The bargain was struck, not through threats or emotion, but through preparation, precision, and evidence. After the meeting, I returned to Nova to relay the news. Marcus and Lena cheered quietly, careful not to let outsiders hear. I smiled, but my mind was already moving ahead. There was work to do, projects to stabilize, employees to reassure, investors to meet. Silverline had been paused, the council had been notified, the company now had me back in a position to guide it properly. And yet, somewhere deep, a thought persisted. I had given them terms generous enough to allow them to survive, but the leverage lay in my hands. The power balance had shifted. If they chose recklessness again, the consequences would be irreversible. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. The cranes glimmered in the late afternoon sun. The river stretched past factories and old warehouses. The horizon was still, waiting like concrete before the pour. I whispered to myself, almost as a promise, we rebuild, we stabilize, and we make sure the cracks never hide again. The contracts were drafted by noon. The legal language was precise, heavy, almost cold, but it carried weight. Every clause, every paragraph, every term I had insisted on was there. Operational control, independent oversight, council verification. I read each page twice before signing. I was not nervous. I was deliberate. Marcus and Lena arrived shortly after. They watched as I inked the final signature. The room was quiet. Even the hum of the printer seemed to pause in respect. Congratulations, Marcus said softly. I did not answer, not because I did not appreciate it, but because the victory was quiet, internal, not for celebration. This was a shift in power, a realignment. The empire had not fallen yet, but it was now fragile. The phone buzzed, Eleanor. They accepted it, she said. All terms, all authority. The council will verify, but legally you are in control. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. You did it without a single public confrontation, she observed. Precision wins more than shouting ever could. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the first genuine release of tension in weeks. The city lights reflected across the glass walls of Nova's office. Everything felt sharp, clear, like concrete before the pour sets. After the call, I reviewed the Silverline files one more time. The metadata confirmed my authorship, every email and draft logged. The council's upcoming verification meant that not only was my claim protected, but the company itself would now have to acknowledge it publicly. Lena approached with sketches of the South Boston site. "We can start planning the next phase," she said. "Yes," I replied, "but carefully, every move measured." We spent the next hour reviewing schedules, material deliveries, and staffing. Even small decisions carried weight. The difference now was that I had authority. Not temporary influence, but real enforceable power. Every document we touched, every plan we drew was legally under my oversight. By late afternoon, the first emails came from Andrew's group's remaining board members. Some were cautiously congratulatory, some veiled with sarcasm. I ignored them. The only correspondence that mattered was with council officials, clients, and our own team. As the sun began to set, I stood at the window, watching the cranes along the river. Each one held steel frames poised like the bones of a city yet to rise. I thought about Ethan, about Henry, about the fragile edifice of their confidence. They had assumed control meant authority, that their names alone carried weight. They had forgotten that structures fail when the foundation is cracked. And I had the foundation. A knock on the office door startled me. Marcus and Lena looked up. A courier held a small package, no return address. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a simple USB drive. Plugging it into the laptop, I found a single file, Silverline's revised project plan. Notes in margins indicated decisions made without proper review, material substitutions, cost-cutting measures that violated basic structural guidelines. I let out a quiet laugh. They really didn't learn. "They never do," Marcus said. I nodded. "And we're going to make sure this time they can't." By evening, the office had settled into a quiet rhythm. Papers stacked neatly, whiteboards filled with precise annotations, laptops humming softly. I walked through the room, touching the edge of the table where contracts lay. This table, these walls, these plans, they were ours. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Carla Ross. "The city approved the phase I build," she said. "We're moving forward. Your team will lead the oversight." I smiled faintly. "We'll make sure it stands," I replied. After the call, I sat at the window. The city stretched below, glass towers reflecting fading light, streets glinting with rain. Somewhere in one of those towers, Henry and Ethan were pacing, recalculating. The balance of power had shifted. I felt no triumph, only clarity. I opened the Nova blueprint folder and reviewed the foundation plans one more time. Every beam, every column, every support was accounted for. The South Boston site would rise solid because it was guided by knowledge, not ego. I wrote a single line in my notebook: "Authority is not given, it is assumed and verified." Night deepened outside and the office hummed quietly. The city beyond was asleep, cranes paused like sentinels. But within these walls, decisions were already moving forward. Nova was alive. Andrew's group's mistakes were exposed, and I was ready for the next step. Tomorrow, the council would verify. Tomorrow, the public would see what had been mine all along. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment to simply exist in the certainty that comes from preparation, precision, and undeniable truth. I shut the laptop and looked around the office. The small team, the sketches, the evidence, the contracts, it was all here and it was all ours. The foundation was set. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel the weight lift just enough to breathe. I stepped to the window once more, the city lights twinkling in the reflection. Somewhere far above, the cranes awaited the next pour. Somewhere below, the river moved quietly toward the harbor. And somewhere in the quiet between, I realized that I was not only reclaiming what was mine, but also shaping what would come next. The bargain was struck. The power had shifted. And the real work, the construction of something enduring, was only beginning. The office was quiet that morning, almost unnaturally so. The winter light filtered through the blinds, striping the walls with pale gold. Outside, the city moved with a rhythm I had learned to trust, even when chaos loomed. Inside Nova, everything waited for me to give it shape. I walked to the table where sketches, contracts, and notes were already organized. Marcus and Lena were seated ready for the day. No one spoke until I pulled up the chair. "Today," I began, "we make Nova more than a response. We make it a standard." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Define standard." I let the silence hang, letting the weight of the phrase settle. "We build trust before contracts. We deliver without question. We manage risk as though the future depends on it, because it does. Not for headlines, not for applause, but because our structures, our work, our integrity must be unassailable." Marcus nodded slowly. "So no shortcuts." "No shortcuts," I said. We spent the morning reviewing the South Boston site. Every foundation calculation was double-checked. Every supplier confirmed. every timeline verified with precision. It was exhausting, but the energy in the room was tangible, focused, alive. By early afternoon, the news broke. Andrews Group announces leadership reorganization. The headline was careful, polite, even sanitized. Raven Andrews assumes operational control. Council verifies authorship of Silverline Designs. Beneath the words, photographs from the council hearing, my signature on the contract, a line chart showing timelines and approvals. I read it once, then closed the laptop. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. Lena leaned over my shoulder. They're acknowledging it publicly. Yes, I said, and it's only the beginning. The first calls came from clients and investors who had been hesitant over the past weeks. Their tone shifted immediately. They didn't mention Andrews Group. They asked about Nova. They wanted assurances that projects would continue, that the integrity of the design would be honored. I set up a conference call with each major client. I spoke clearly, concisely, never defensive. Evidence accompanied every statement. Every question was answered with fact. Not emotion, not promise, just certainty. By evening, our first major contract under the Nova name was finalized. The South Boston pilot project was officially underway, with approval from the council, funding secured, and oversight in place. I stepped back from the table and looked at the office. The small team, the sketches, the stacks of contracts, the printer still humming softly, all of it was the foundation of something larger, something permanent. That night, I returned to the apartment and looked at the city from the window. The streets glimmered under streetlights. Cranes reached toward the dark sky. The river reflected light like molten metal. Somewhere, the Andrews Group towers were lit, but I no longer felt their weight pressing against my chest. I pulled out my notebook. A new heading, the new foundation. I wrote, 1. Integrity is non-negotiable. 2. Oversight is the guardrail of trust. 3. Every decision is a brick, lay it carefully. 4. Transparency is stronger than any contract. 5. Growth comes after stability, not before. The lines looked simple, almost naive. But they were a blueprint, a philosophy, a method, a promise to myself and to everyone who would work with me. A message arrived from a leaner, congratulations. They finally understand. Or at least they cannot ignore you. I smiled faintly. They never understood before, I typed back. Now they only have to watch. The following days were filled with small victories, securing permits, verifying materials, assigning teams. The energy of the office shifted from anxiety to purposeful motion. Every task completed felt like a brick set in the foundation of a building far larger than any single project. I visited the South Boston site personally. The concrete had been poured overnight. Workers moved methodically, following plans I had overseen personally. Each beam, each column, each scaffold was placed according to precision. I watched and measured, checked and verified, corrected when necessary. One of the junior engineers approached. Ms. Andrews, he said, it feels different when you're here. I nodded. It should. Every foundation needs someone who cares about it enough to notice the cracks before they appear. By the end of the week, Andrews Group had begun the process of reassigning projects under my oversight. Henry and Ethan were still in the picture, but their influence had been realigned. They could no longer act independently in ways that could jeopardize the company. I had formal authority, oversight, and legal verification. At the office, we stood around the table late in the evening. No one spoke for a few minutes. The hum of the printer, the occasional creak of the building settling, the soft rhythm of Boston outside, all it took to feel the gravity of what we had accomplished. Finally, Marcus said, "So what's next?" I smiled, looking at the floor plans pinned to the wall, the contracts stacked neatly, the laptop open with schedules and blueprints. We continue, carefully, methodically, every step deliberate. Build first, then grow. Foundations before walls. Lena nodded. Sounds like a mantra. It's a blueprint, I corrected, for everything from concrete to culture. That's the difference. I stood by the window again, looking out at the cranes, the river, the city. Somewhere behind me, the lights in the Andrews towers gleamed like watchful eyes. I had no need to look back. The structure was mine to guide now. I whispered quietly, almost to myself, we have our foundation. Now we build everything else. The morning after the final contracts were signed felt surreal. Nova's office was filled with light that bounced off the walls, sketches pinned neatly, laptops humming softly, and our small team already at work. There was no tension in the air, only the quiet focus of people who knew the path forward and the weight of the work they carried. I stood at the window, watching Boston wake. Traffic began to pulse. Construction cranes rotated slowly, river water glimmered in pale sunlight. I traced the horizon and thought about every step that led here: betrayal, meticulous preparation, precise action. Every fracture in Andrew's group had been visible if you knew where to look. I had followed them like a blueprint and arrived exactly where I needed to be. Marcus came up behind me, coffee in hand. "You look like you're planning the world," he said. "I'm planning the foundation," I replied. "The rest will follow." Lena joined, her sketches in hand. "We need to schedule site inspections," she said. "Materials, crews, approvals, everything needs to be aligned." I nodded. "Start with the South Boston site. Confirm permits, double-check suppliers, and assign oversight to engineers we trust. Every decision documented, every step verifiable." The team dispersed to follow orders. I walked back to the table, tracing the contracts we had signed. Each one was a reminder authority wasn't given, it was claimed and verified. Every clause, every signature, every verified date was a shield against the mistakes of the past. By noon, we were deep in action. Blueprints, procurement lists, schedules, site plans, all flowing in a rhythm that was both chaotic and orderly. The hum of the office, the faint click of keyboards, and the occasional soft laughter created a symphony of work. I took a moment to review the silver-lined documentation one last time. The metadata, timestamps, emails, and revisions all pointed to the same truth. I was the rightful author, and Nova Constructs was now the recognized entity to execute the project. Nothing could undo that. Not threats, not press releases, not the fragile ego of a father or brother. By mid-afternoon, emails from clients began arriving. They had read the council's announcement, they had verified the documentation, and now they wanted timelines and assurances. I responded directly, professionally, with evidence and schedules attached. No fluff. No promises beyond what we could guarantee. Each response strengthened Nova's credibility. Every acknowledgement from the city, every confirmation from clients was a brick in the structure we were building. The metaphor was no longer just symbolic, it was tangible. The sky outside darkened as evening approached, casting long shadows across the office. I walked to the window again, seeing the city lights reflected on the wet streets below. Somewhere in the distance, the cranes stood tall and patient. I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." A soft buzz at my phone, Carla Ross. "The council approved the phase I build," she said. "We're moving forward, your team will lead." "Understood," I replied. "We'll ensure everything meets standards." Hanging up, I felt a rare calm. The storms of the past weeks, betrayal, legal threats, construction errors, public scrutiny, had passed. What remained was creation, methodical, deliberate, enduring. I turned back to the office. Lena and Marcus were reviewing the next phase of site preparation. Their focus was absolute. I smiled faintly. This was what mattered. People committed to quality, to precision, to integrity. I opened my notebook and wrote a final line under the heading "The New Foundation." Integrity first. Every decision deliberate. Every structure verified. The future is built on foundations, not names. The team gathered around, asking questions, checking schedules, coordinating deliveries. The air was filled with purpose, not panic. Nova Constructs had become more than a response to theft. It was a statement, a demonstration, a promise that precision, preparation, and accountability would prevail. Later, alone, I walked to the window once more. The city stretched beneath me, glittering with lights and reflections. I thought of Andrew's group, of the towers that once defined my world. I thought of the people who had underestimated me, the mistakes they had made. And I thought of Nova, rising slowly, surely, built on my rules and my oversight. The river reflected cranes and lights like molten steel. Somewhere, a foghorn echoed, distant but clear. I inhaled deeply. The collapse had revealed the truth, and now I was free to build upon it. I whispered quietly, "We have our foundation. Now we build everything else, strong, measured, and enduring." The office was silent but alive, the city quiet but breathing. I stepped away from the window, ready to oversee the first pour at South Boston. Every blueprint, every contract, every calculation was a promise kept. And this time, no one could take it from me. The night came, calm and purposeful. I closed my laptop, straightened the contracts, and sat at the table. The hum of the city was a lullaby of potential. Tomorrow, the cranes would rise, the concrete would pour, and Nova would stand, not because of legacy, but because of precision, perseverance, and the vision of a single person who refused to be erased. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to rest, confident that what I had begun would endure. The new foundation was complete.